Greetings again, everyone. I'm Meyer Semiatiki at the Young Workers' Rights Hub at X University in downtown Toronto, formerly known by another name that is currently under review. Our hub's mission is to promote student and young workers' well-being at work. Specifically, we aim to advance young workers' understanding of their rights on the job, how to exercise, and how to expand them. Today's webinar focuses on how to assure that workplaces can best capitalize on the skills and talents of disabled young workers. We begin, as always, however, with an acknowledgement of the land we live on and what we owe its first peoples. Canadians live on Indigenous land. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. Its first inhabitants were the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee. Recent weeks have brought us horrific reminder of the devastating impact colonialism has had on Indigenous children, families, and communities in this country. I'm referring, of course, to the discovery of unmarked remains of 215 children who attended the Kamloops residential school. We know also that Kamloops was not an isolated case. Many deaths of children happened at residential schools across Canada. We need to acknowledge the damage and wrongs that settler society has inflicted on Indigenous peoples. We also need concrete action that matches our responsibility for wrongs that were done in Canada's name. So I urge myself and all of us to play a part in advancing justice for Indigenous nations and peoples. And now on to our topic for today and our speaker. This is the fourth of a five-part Know Your Rights at Work webinar series. It's designed for youth. I'm pleased to report that today's topic was proposed by youth themselves, whom we canvassed earlier for topic ideas. The most frequently requested topic we received was, tell us about barriers disabled youth face in the labor market and what can be done to dismantle them. So that's what we'll be discussing today. And we couldn't ask for a better speaker on the subject than Dr. Sally Lindsay. She is one of Canada's leading researchers and advocates for disabled youth on the job. Dr. Lindsay holds several notable positions. She is senior scientist at the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, where she also holds the position of project director of the Transitions and Inclusive Environments Lab. It promotes disabled youth employment. Dr. Lindsay is also an associate professor in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Toronto. She has published over 150 scholarly articles and papers, many of them on topics related to disabled youth employment. So get ready to learn a lot from Dr. Lindsay and to ask any questions that you may have. Sally will be speaking for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll go into a Q&A. Please post any questions you have for Sally in the chat function at any time. And this session is being recorded, and I'd ask all participants to please mute yourselves. And a warm and grateful welcome to you, Sally Lindsay. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. So I think I'm okay to share my screen now. Oops. Try again. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
You are. Okay, good. It doesn't always work, so I'd like to check. Okay, whoops. So thanks for inviting me. This is a very exciting group that you have, and looks like very relevant topics that you discuss. Yeah, so I lead the Transitions and Inclusive Environments Lab at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehab, and most of my work focuses on improving inclusion of children, youth, and young adults with various types of disabilities in school, in home, and in work, and in the community. So a quick overview today. I'll be drawing on lots of different studies where we've interviewed lots of employers and youth and people with disabilities. So this is kind of an overview of various parts of our research. So we'll talk about how employers can benefit from hiring people with disabilities, current employment barriers that youth with disabilities face, and what is the role of disability disclosure in workplace accommodations? And finally, some advice for youth with disabilities at work. So just to give kind of a broad picture, we know that employment is a fundamental human right with an important value in people's lives. And increasing employment and retention of people with disabilities is a common goal for rehabilitation professionals. And many people with disabilities are willing to work, they're capable of working, but they do encounter many barriers in finding employment and in maintaining employment. And in Canada, there are over 3.5 million working age Canadians with a disability. And quite a large proportion of them, over close to 800,000, are unemployed but would like to work. And their disability usually doesn't prevent them from doing so. But sadly, usually around half or less of them are employed. Usually, I think the last stat I saw was about 47%. And most people would like to work, but they often do remain unemployed or underemployed just because of many of the barriers that they encounter. Having a diverse workforce is essential for a global successful economy. And a recent survey of a national and multinational companies report that executives often identify disability as one of their key areas that needs improvement in their diversity and inclusion efforts. And if we look at the demand side of employment approaches, such as making workplaces accessible and user-friendly, which are needed to help people with disabilities to obtain employment, this is really gaining more momentum. So applying such an approach helps to shift the focus away from it being a person-centered or a person with disability-centered focus, and shifts that attention more to employers on how they should be changing their work environments to be more inclusive. And in doing so, it can help to alleviate some of the stigma and the discrimination that's often associated with it. So a couple of years ago, we saw that this was gaining momentum. A lot of people were reporting on lots of the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, and we decided to do a systematic review about it. And here were some of the key findings that we had. A lot of them were reporting improvements in profitability, competitive advantage, inclusive work culture, and ability awareness. So when we look at this in a little more detail, we can see that many of the studies have reported improved profits as a result of hiring people with disabilities. So for example, some studies have shown that in supermarkets who hired people with disabilities, they had increased sales. Others were reporting that providing workplace accommodations to people with disabilities helped to increase their profits. And mainly this was in the form of through cost savings or not having to rehire and retrain workers. So there's often a reduced turnover and improved retention. And other studies were showing that people with disabilities showed that they were more reliable, punctual, and longer serving in the role, and were more dedicated and loyal than employees without disabilities. Other research shows that hiring people with disabilities can also help to improve business image and corporate social responsibility. So other benefits of hiring people with disabilities, some businesses report that they gained a competitive advantage over others that were not hiring people with disabilities. And they attributed this improvement to having a pool of loyal employees that exceeded expectations with lower turnover rates and performed better in terms of attendance and employee engagement. And some studies describe increased competitive advantage as well as having improved customer diversity. So once people saw that there were people with disabilities working in the store, that kind of attracted also more people who not only had a disability, but maybe their families had a disability, and that helped with that. Several studies also report the benefits of customer loyalty or satisfaction related to hiring people with disabilities. So like winning brand loyalty and customers who also value inclusion. Other research highlights enhanced innovation with hiring people with disabilities because they often bring a lot of creativity. They've had to do a lot of problem solving in challenges that they've had to face in terms of making something accessible. So they bring a lot of innovative and problem solving ideas to the workplace. And also in terms of enhanced productivity and work ethic. Many studies have found that they're dedicated, hardworking, and efficient. And we did notice a couple studies as well that show that there's an enhanced safety in the workplace to hiring people with disabilities. And one of the other main areas, and probably my favorite area, is that the benefit is the inclusive work culture and ability awareness. So many studies reported that having an enhanced, inclusive, and diverse workplace as a result of hiring more people with disabilities, because as you're hiring them, they're becoming more aware of their lived experiences and sharing that, and it helps to reduce some of these common stereotypes. And there are many secondary benefits of hiring people with disabilities as well, but there didn't seem to be as many studies that were focusing on the benefits to the actual people with disabilities themselves. But some of the things that did come out, they highlighted an improved quality of life, enhanced self-confidence, of course, a source of income, and an expanded social network and sense of community. And then, so we've done a lot of research as well with employers, interviewing lots of different kinds of employers, some who have a lot of experience in working with people with disabilities and some it's their first time. And so we kind of synthesized what their perspectives were on working with people with disabilities. So some of our findings highlighted that employers had several strategies to include people with disabilities in the workforce, and included such things as various recruitment strategies and retention strategies like job analysis, job matching, and trying to provide an inclusive work culture. So inclusionary recruitment practices include having things like senior leadership and senior management. They obviously need to be committed to having a diverse and inclusive workplace, implementing diversity policies, and linking people with disabilities and employers, because you can have someone that wants to be inclusive, but if you don't have that matching mechanism. And also using structured interviews to reduce discrimination towards people with disabilities. And obviously also having an inclusive and accessible way for them to apply to the position. So although employers highlighted the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, increased disability awareness among coworkers is urgently needed. So often what we have found in our research is that there's often a lot of good momentum at the upper levels, but that doesn't always get transferred into the coworker levels of the people who are working day to day, besides someone that has a disability. So other areas that we have found include advocacy. So having outreach programs, partnering with schools and youth centers, employment programs, and building awareness through inclusion campaigns. So our hospital has, I think for many years now, we've had it's called the Dear Everybody campaign, where our CEO has been quite an advocate of enhancing the inclusion of people with disabilities. And so things like that, just getting the word out and that people should be more inclusive. And another one, of course, is around creating comfortable environments and open communication. And a lot of this is around also focusing on youth strengths. So focusing on what they can do, not the things that they may not be able to do, but what can they do? And of course, training. So training, and I mean diversity and inclusion training, and it should be provided at various different levels, not just at the leadership or a kind of a higher up level, but can you work with someone on a day-to-day level? And all of these things help to address the stigma and stereotypes towards people with disabilities. Once you get to know and have more experience with someone with a disability, you feel more comfortable. And that brings me to the, so this was developed, employers' development of disability confidence was something that we kind of, as we did more interviews with employers, we were noticing that there was an increase in comfort and also in change in their attitudes towards people with disabilities. So on the far left column, these were kind of more of the employers who they had never really worked with someone with a disability before. Maybe it was just, they were just kind of thinking about it. They felt a little uncomfortable. They weren't sure what to do. And there were some stereotypes and some stigma there. Sometimes not always intentionally, but just because they lacked experience. And then in the next column, once they, maybe got a little bit more knowledge, or they had started to work with a person with a disability, and that they had called this themselves reaching beyond their comfort zone. And once they did that and got to know people with disabilities and their day-to-day experiences, they were starting to feel a little more comfortable. And that moved into the next category. And then you get more training, more knowledge, and you're feeling more comfortable. And then that's when things we've noticed started to shift in terms of people's perspectives on disability. And I'm looking at current barriers to employment that many youth with disabilities face. And we've done a lot of work in this area, for sure. And a lot of these, I would say these are the kind of the top areas. And we've done some studies even within some of these. We've done a lot on transportation is a huge barrier, as getting around on the TTC. You can only imagine what it's like navigating the accessible transport, and then how do you coordinate that with where you may be able to find a job that's actually accessible and has all of those things. Lack of support is another one that comes up as well. Sometimes there's a lack of support from teachers or people who sometimes discourage younger people with disabilities, that they don't feel that they can do it, and sometimes from parents. And probably the biggest one would be still discrimination and attitudes, which is a very tricky one to change. So why focus on youth? So youth with disabilities are more likely to be unemployed compared to youth without disabilities. And they do face many barriers in terms of looking for accessible and meaningful employment, and including challenges in disclosing their disability and requesting workplace accommodations. So although the majority of youth with disabilities receive accommodations at school, 68% of them receive no workplace accommodations. And sometimes this could be a result of them not knowing that they need to ask for that, because a lot of times in school, that's pretty much sorted out for you. But so sometimes they may not know how to go about it, or that they need to ask for it and advocate for their own needs in the workplace. So I'm looking at some of the employment rates for youth with disabilities. So for youth age 20 to 24 who have a disability, it's about 57% compared to 87% of those without a disability. So quite a big gap. And then in the younger group, the teenagers 15 to 19 with a disability, their employment rate is about 40% compared to 51 without a disability. So that translates into over 500,000 Canadians aged 15 to 24 that have a disability. And many encounter challenges in this transition period to adulthood, including securing employment, and even more so in the COVID times. And this is really a critical age because it is an optimal time to enhance these work-based identities and positive behaviors. So it's really an important time for youth to help them get employment skills and paid work. So shifting over to what is the role of disability disclosure and workplace accommodations. So workplace accommodations, so we're referring to things like a modified work environment, like maybe you need a height adjustable desk or different lighting, maybe adaptive technology, sometimes flexible hours. And these are supported by human rights and accessibility legislation that places a duty on employers to provide reasonable accommodations to employees with disabilities. So obviously you need to disclose or to tell your employer that you don't need to tell them the details about your disability, but you do need to tell them about things that you may need an accommodation in order to perform your best in your role. However, research shows that many people with disabilities are often really reluctant to tell their employer about these things for many reasons. So including like they're worried maybe that about stigma, about discrimination, and especially when you're younger, maybe it's your first job, you don't want to, or you're in a precarious employment, like you're in a part-time or casual or contract, and you're really reluctant to disclose. So although many people could benefit from having workplace accommodations, only a very small proportion of people are actually disclosing. So employers are obligated to at least consider employees' accommodation requests, provided that they don't cause the company financial hardship. And a lot of the research has shown that most accommodations can be provided at little or no cost. And in our lab, I do frequently hire people with disabilities, or some of our students have disabilities, and I don't ever recall it costing any extra cost. Most employers are often unaware or lack confidence in how to have an effective disability disclosure discussion. They're often not sure what to say or how to go about it. But it's really critical to develop these strategies to help employers and managers to have these successful disclosure discussions. So despite the high prevalence of people with disabilities among the working age Canadians, less than 30% of companies have disability-specific policies, and only 18% of companies offer disability training programs that address effective disclosure discussions. So among people with disabilities who need workplace accommodations, only 44% said that their employer was actually aware of their needs. And a little over half, so 55% of Canadians with disabilities feel that hiding their disability increases their chances of being hired or promoted. But these high non-disclosure rates are really concerning because employees with disabilities are at higher risk of occupational injury if their accommodations are not provided. So why focus on disclosure and accommodations? So we know, although accommodations have a high potential to improve employment and work participation, they are underutilized, with less than 1 in 5 people actually receiving accommodations. And we know that self-disclosure of a disability is a prerequisite of receiving accommodations. However, many people are either unprepared or poorly prepared to disclose their condition and advocate for their needs in the workplace, especially for younger people. And workplace accommodations are important because research shows that they can help to enhance not only workplace productivity, but quality of life, workplace inclusion, and physical and mental health well-being. So our research has shown that many barriers and facilitators to workplace disclosure. So many of the facilitators that we've seen that can help to enhance this are having supports and resources, job interviews and career training, knowledge of rights and supports, and also promoting the benefits of disabilities and disclosing. So if you make it more kind of common and acceptable, or even just sort of eliminating the need for that altogether. So for example, when I hire or when I'm interviewing for a new position, I just ask everyone, what do you need to do your best in your job? And then, that might be flexible hours, that might be different lighting, like everyone wants to just do their best. So let's just ask everyone and avoid the need for this whole disclosure process. So barriers that we have found in disclosing, obviously I think it really depends on people's comfort level and experience and knowledge of working with people with disabilities. And it really varies by the type of job, the type of industry you're working in, and also the nature of the disability. So is it a visible one? Are you using a wheelchair or a walker? Is it non-visible? And also obviously stigma and discrimination and advocacy skills and self-confidence. So in interviewing youth with disabilities, we asked them what makes an inclusive workplace. And they shared with us that it was things around that help to include them, like social activities and workplace networking, having an understanding and respectful employers. And also they wanted to work in places where they knew that were kind of disability friendly. They weren't going to be the only person there. They hired other people with disabilities to help them to feel more comfortable. And employers who were open to providing workplace accommodations and that had a good communication. And we had, I won't play it now, but I'm happy to share the link. It's a quick 5-minute YouTube video. If people want, I can send it to them later. And it was developed by a youth with a disability in our lab because that was something that came up from our interviews. They wanted to know what are our rights in the workplace. And it kind of talks about how, like, what are your rights, how to ask for accommodations, and what are employers responsible for. So what youth with disabilities can do to advance their access and promotability at work. So based on our research and what youth with disabilities have told us in terms of their advice and recommendations in finding work, and not only in finding work, but something that's meaningful that helps you to grow in your career pathway. So they said networking. Most of them always talk about networking. Whenever you're looking for work, tell people in your network that you're looking for work. It's often when you often get a job, or certainly one of your first jobs, based on somebody that you know. A lot of the jobs out there aren't advertised, and it's really someone in your network. And find a mentor. Like, think about the career pathway that you want to go on and find someone that's maybe in that role or close to that role, and ask them if they could mentor you on how did they get to their career pathway. volunteering is very important. Not just the 40 hours that the high schoolers are required to do, but really think about not only what are your career interests, like certainly try to find something that's in that area and see if you like it, but also maybe try out a couple of other different things. The number of people who have told me that they had never would have thought that they liked these certain areas, and they end up going off in their career pathway, but had they not tried it out, they wouldn't have known. And for people who are starting out, maybe in their first job, then, and maybe you're lacking not confidence, but you don't want to have one of those experiences where you're worried about discrimination, then try the disability, what I call the disability friendly employers. There's a huge list of them, people who are, more than welcoming to hire them. There are lots of people who are looking specifically to hire people with disabilities. And also certainly know what your accommodation needs are. So really read the job description. A lot of employers are doing a better job now of listing out, like, do you need to lift things? Do you need to stand? So really take a good look at that and figure out, is it something that you can do? And then be prepared to advocate for your needs and also know what you need to ask for. So to sum up, I think hiring people with disabilities is really important because they are one of the largest minority groups in the workforce. And I think that we really need to continue advocating to include people with disabilities in the workplace. And so as part of our research, we've developed many toolkits. So this is just an example here. We've put together a youth toolkit that was co-developed with youth with disabilities. It's evidence informed, but the youth have put their own spin on it to make it in a fun way and not a research and science kind of way. So we've done that. We've put a toolkit together as well for employers on how they can have more effective disability disclosure discussions. And we've put one together for clinicians on how they can better support youth with disabilities. And those are just our funders, SHRC and CIHR. And I did want to mention that we do run a webinar, nothing like advertising your webinar series in another webinar series, but we do run one as well on, it's called Reinvent Research Alliance for Inclusive Employment, and people are welcome to email us if they would like to sign up for, I think one of our next ones is probably on COVID and employment, but yeah, I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Sally, thank you so much for that really comprehensive, wide-ranging discussion of issues related to employment for disabled youth. And I'll make a quick comment on where you ended off. Looking for other promo outlets is always important and welcome for anyone organizing events. And if you send us any of your information, we'd be really happy to post it on our Young Workers' Rights Hub, so people visiting us can see the work you're doing and can get access to knowing about your activities and programming. So now I'm imagining that there are any number of questions that have come our way from the audience, and I'm going to turn this part of the session over to Giselle Girardo, who both hosts our webinars and moderates our Q&A sessions. And Giselle is a very recent, freshly minted graduate of our university in politics and politics and governance. So Giselle, over to you.
Thank you, Meyer. Thank you, Dr. Sally. Myself, and I'm sure others in this event have learned a lot of the benefits of hiring people with disabilities on both employer and employee side, employers' development, current barriers to employment, the focus on youth, disability disclosure, and workplace accommodations. We have several questions for you today. If anyone would like to ask a question, please send it to me through the chat and we'll ensure to address it before today's event, before the end of today's event. Our first question is, what can youth expect for accommodations on the job, especially for those who are just freshly graduated or they're trying to dip their toes into the labor market?
So it really depends on the type of job. Yeah, does that person have a suggestion of the kind of job, or
I think
sorry.
they're talking mostly about remote work.
Oh, remote work. Yes. It's been really interesting because we just finished doing interviews with youth with and without disabilities during the COVID times. And a lot of them really liked working from home. I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out once we return to normal, hopefully soon. And a lot of studies have shown, and some of our own work has shown, that this can really be, I think this might be a game changer for people with disabilities, because it's really changed our thinking about being more flexible. Like employers, a lot of employers, I think, were really reluctant to have people work from home, and now it's just, we had to do it. And I think a lot of employers realize, hey, this is working. And so I think that could be something that can really help, well, everyone, but certainly people with disabilities who may have more difficulties with transportation or maybe self-care or that kind of thing, where working from home could be, like what we've heard from some of our interviews was that the young people were saying, well, I already have my desk all set up with the things that I use, my adaptive technology, I'm comfortable here. Like, you know, what kind of lighting you like and all that kind of stuff. So I think that I would like to see that moving forward for sure.
Our next question is, how are young people with disabilities protected in the workplace?
Oh, these are all big questions. Well, as I said, I'm happy to share my little, not now, but if that person wants to email me later, I have the quick 5-minute video that does highlight all of kind of more of the legalities about it. And I think it's certainly, you want to know, like maybe go to the Ministry of Labor or the Government of Canada websites and kind of know the general, the laws around what employers should and certainly should not be doing, and knowing your rights within that.
Thank you for that. And then we have different questions, but they kind of are tied together. Disclosing disabilities differ for each person. What is your advice for young workers who may want to disclose their disabilities but are hesitant to do so?
Oh boy, these are all big questions. And I have a PhD student right now who is working on that. We've done so many things of what's the best way to disclose and how and when, and it's true, there is no one size fits all. There is no really right and wrong answer. It really depends on the person and their comfort level, and also their, like, the role that they're in. Every employment situation is different. I think you really just need to kind of weigh the pros and cons and do what you think is best for your situation.
And then as a question tied to that one, at what point of the hiring process do you disclose disability?
Oh, these are all tough questions. Again, it depends on the person, and it depends, I think, on the nature of the job. Like a lot of job postings, you do see that at the bottom, like they have that little disclaimer, if you need accommodations at any stage. So I think it really depends on, you know, how comfortable you are. And we've had some young people that we've talked to in our research who have said, you know what, I'm going to tell them up front, because if they're not cool with it at the beginning, then that's not a place where I'd want to work. So that's one way to look at it.
Thank you for that. And then the next question that we have is, what kind of resources are available to youth with disabilities?
So yes, this is all, I'm just thinking these folks should email me, and I'm happy to share a copy of our toolkit. We have several whole pages of resources, and even our hospital has lots of resources for young people. Yeah, I'm happy to email. We have pages and pages of resources. I'm happy to email people if they want to reach out.
Thank you. And Sally's email is in the chat. It's slindsay@hollandbloorview.ca. And then our next question is this. Okay, there you go. The next question that we have is regarding your studies that you have done. People with disabilities is such a broad term encompassing so many conditions. Do these studies address at all the limitations of addressing the community in such a broad way? And then there's another question to that one.
Yeah. So I'll answer the first part first. So this presentation was more of a synthesis of many studies, and these have been commonalities that we've seen across many different types of physical disabilities. We've focused on brain injury, we've focused on autism. There are certainly some nuances between main disability types, especially if it's visible versus not. There are some differences in how and when people are going about that, but for the most part, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the challenges that people are encountering. And what was the second part of that?
And the second part of the question is, what are the benefits of hiring youth with disabilities that are not visibly disabled, but still need to be accommodated?
Well, I think there's certainly all the same benefits. So for example, like in our lab, we regularly, right now we have a young person with a disability. I regularly hire people with disabilities. And the benefit that I see, and I think certainly that most other people in our lab have seen, is that kind of shared with experience. Like you really get to know what it's like from their perspective. And I think it really shapes your thinking. That's the one thing that I've really liked. It really makes me think, like a lot of the times, you know, kind of from a research perspective, this is the direction things should go in. And then you get a lived experience perspective, and it's like, oh, wow, we really haven't thought about these other important aspects. And it's really, and as some of the other studies were pointing out as well, it's really that innovation, and it's just, I love the way it changes your thinking.
Thank you for that. It is really good to know that just from hiring people that are with disabilities really expands the inclusion and the diversity in the workplace. And that also ties to innovation. The next question that we have here is, are the current governmental policies and community resources sufficient enough to support youth with disabilities?
I don't think so. Not from what I've seen, and not from what I've heard, from what young people are telling me, and no.
Our next question here is, how do we know that employers are indeed following the ministry's guidelines and not bluffing?
We don't. I don't think that. I think employers can be very creative in how they can get around it. For sure. I don't think that there's, yeah. Policies don't always, like, they're good, they're good in intentions, but they can't change attitudes, I don't think, which is the main thing that needs to change.
So they have a follow-up question with that one. So how do we manage in that situation where they are kind of like circling around the accommodations and the guidelines?
Well, I think certainly if there's something that they're, you know, if they're completely not providing an accommodation, and they should be, then there certainly are like policies and laws that one could follow up with, you know, occupational, if you have an occupational health department, or, you know, if needed be, like reaching out to Ministry of Labor or those kinds of things. So if there is really, you know, wrongdoing or harm or those kinds of things, then certainly there are avenues.
Our next question is, when we're networking and trying to find a mentor in the workplace, how do we find out which employers are disability friendly?
Oh, if they want to email, there are a whole list. We have lists, or you can, they usually post them once a year. I can't recall what it's called offhand, but yeah, we're happy to share those lists. And there are, I think it is actually out of Ryerson, there is, isn't it called Magnet or something like that, where they are trying to match up employers and people with disabilities. So employers, they put their jobs on there where they're looking specifically for people with disabilities. And then, yeah, it's run out of Ryerson. I can send the link for that as well.
We can look into that from our end also.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And then our next question is, what should you do if an employer does not provide accommodations you believe that they are required to?
Well, I guess it would depend on the size of the employer. So if it is like a large employer, then you could, you know, go to your like occupational health department, or like those are the kind, in a larger employment setting, those are the kinds of folks who should be implementing that. If it's just sort of a small workplace and they're telling you that they don't want to, I think, then you might have to go like a step further maybe and reach out to Ministry of Labor and those kinds of people to see what your options are.
Just as a side note, 2 weeks ago or so, we did host Ending Discrimination and Harassment at Work webinar, and that recording is available on our website. So that's something that you can look into when it comes to answering and addressing those issues. We have another question here. Over the years that you have been researching, would you say things have improved for disabled workers?
I think I'd like to say that I have noticed. So I've been in this area for probably over 12 years. And I have seen, like, it's certainly not perfect by any means, but I have seen noticeable signs of improvement for sure. And people with a genuine interest in wanting to include people with disabilities. Not just like as a token to check a box, but there's certainly a genuine interest, I think.
We have 2 more-ish questions left. The first one is, they would like to know more about your journey as they are trying to get into a space similar to yours. Can you let us know more about it?
So I guess it would depend on kind of the background that they're in. So are they asking, how do you get into like a academic career, or? Yeah.
Yes.
I think if you're looking to pursue like a master's or a PhD, certainly you want to get either some kind of lab experience or research experience, whether that's volunteering or paid work, because it's so competitive now. Even to get into a master's, like the amount of experience that people have, at least in the programs that I'm involved in, it's so competitive. So I'd recommend really, getting some lab experience, some research experience. Yeah.
Okay. And our last question here is, as you mentioned before, that the current policies and resources are not sufficient to support youth with disabilities. How can young workers advocate for more resources and workplace and governmental policy change for youth with disabilities?
Oh, these are all big questions. That's a great question. I'm just thinking, well, I think things like our hospital is doing, where we're just doing it, right? Like we realize that this is a need. We're doing advocacy. It's built into the work that we're doing. Later this fall or early winter, I will be running a policy workshop with the policy folks. So if this person wants to come along and share their voice or do a pre-recording, and we're happy to share their thoughts and opinions that we can tell the policymakers directly. We're happy to have them.
That is wonderful to hear. Thank you.
You know, Sally, I'm going to jump in to reflect on some of the questions that have come up, and your really interesting answers. In the shameless promotion category, the question about what can young workers do, to improve circumstances for themselves. One possible avenue, I think, will be explored in our next week session, which is our last of the series, which is can joining a union or being part of a union help young workers? And the presenter will be a representative from the union in the country that has the highest proportion of young workers, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, who are so active in retail and grocery and hospitality. So it's not surprising they have a large cluster of young members. And you've given me the idea that in that session, we will ask that person, what does your union do around the issue of disabled young workers? What kind of issues does that raise, and what have you achieved? On the question of how does one become a leading researcher of disabled young workers' rights, I'm struck by the fact that your own educational pathway is through the discipline of sociology. Like somehow we sometimes think that some disciplines are too airy-fairy to have any possible kind of real world or practical, let alone job future to them. Well, lo and behold, you certainly can pick up a lot of skills and insights through disciplines in any field, including the arts and humanities and social sciences. So the people who you research with and who you either publish with or whose publications you read, what are their academic backgrounds? What's the range that exists?
Yeah, I would say so. It's just so interdisciplinary these days. Like it's all over. It is like, and we have people at our hospital who are in arts, who are in geography, who are in medicine, who are like all the engineering. Like it's so wonderful because it's so interdisciplinary, and you feel like you're sort of a hybrid of many different things.
Yeah. And from some of my own experiences, I think as a researcher, the interdisciplinary kind of intersecting places are some of the most exciting and interesting fields to work in. Where kind of everyone, they both know what they know, but they also know what they don't know,
Yeah.
and rely on others to
Yeah.
to
And you're
contribute.
always learning. Like I'm always learning something new.
Yeah. Wow. Well, on that note, we have all learned a lot new today, Sally, Lindsay. This has really been an informative and interesting presentation. And I think, I will say that I think for many of us, you and your research field are now on our intellectual map. Like we know there's a field here that people actually research these experiences and issues. And I will be checking out your organizational website more regularly, and we will link events that you are planning to have, certainly on our Young Workers' Rights Hub website. Sally, Lindsay, thank you for such an interesting and thoughtful and informative presentation today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
No, it was a real learning moment for all of us. And you can see our lineup of episodes, as we call them, of presentations in this Know Your Rights at Work webinar series. Final episode, you won't want to miss it. It's a real cliffhanger. How is this thing going to end? Next Tuesday, join us for a discussion of, can joining a union help young workers? And it again will be next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And Sally, Lindsay, again, thank you so much. This was terrific.
Thank you.